Not if I have to move into an apartment across the way.
Rear Window wasn't just a suspense thriller. It was Alfred Hitchcock's bold experiment in voyeurism and psychological control. Every shadow, every whisper, and every window hid real tension behind the camera. From near-fatal heat exhaustion to obsessive perfectionism, this set became a world of its own. So let's open the blinds and reveal 20 weird facts about Rear Window. Stay until the bonus fact because it will change how you see Hitchcock forever. Let's dive in. The entire Greenwich Village courtyard wasn't real. Hitchcock built the colossal set inside Paramount's largest soundstage. It had 31 fully furnished apartments complete with running water and electricity. Some tenants were real extras who lived there during filming. The director controlled everything, even the sunlight, with massive overhead lamps simulating the time of day. It was a miniature world under Hitchcock's gaze, a living diorama where reality blurred into cinematic illusion. The humidity from the lights made the set unbearable, but Hitchcock refused to cut corners. For him, the control was worth every drop of sweat. The result was one of cinema's most immersive and claustrophobic environments ever built. James Stewart wasn't acting from comfort. His plaster cast weighed nearly 20 pounds and trapped heat under the studio lights. Stewart had to stay seated for most scenes while crew members wiped away the sweat between takes. Hitchcock used his discomfort deliberately to mirror his character's frustration. It wasn't method acting, it was endurance. The confined camera angles amplified the sense of entrapment, making Stewart's weariness bleed into the story. By the final shoot, his exhaustion was real. Hitchcock later said the physical limits made Stewart's performance so authentic that it was like watching a man quietly unravel before your eyes. Grace Kelly's elegance masked danger. In one stunt, she climbs across Jeff's apartment window in heels to break into the suspected murderer's home. The scene looks graceful, but she nearly slipped on the slick metal ledge. Hitchcock shot it in one continuous take and refused a stunt double. The crew watched in silence as Kelly balanced above a 20-foot drop to the stage floor. When she made it across the set, erupted in applause. Hitchcock calmly said one more for safety. The perfectionist wanted the smallest detail of hesitation on film because he believed fear couldn't be faked. The film's realism came from live performances, not post-production tricks. Hitchcock used a complex intercom system connecting each apartment on the set. Actors playing neighbors performed their scenes in real time as the camera focused on Stewart's reactions. The noise from radio's conversations and arguments was happening simultaneously. It wasn't sound design, it was organized chaos. Hitchcock directed it like a symphony, every light cue, every movement perfectly timed. This made the film feel alive, unpredictable, and strangely intimate, as if the audience were spying on real people instead of characters. The heat on set was brutal. Those giant arc lights turned the soundstage into an oven reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Crew members fainted from dehydration, and the smell of melting paint filled the air. Hitchcock famously worked in a dark suit and tie even under those conditions. He refused to remove his jacket, believing a director must always look composed. Stewart once joked that Hitchcock looked cooler than everyone else while his cast cooked. In truth, the director kept a secret fan under his chair. He may have orchestrated suspense, but he wasn't immune to the heat. Hitchcock's obsession with control extended even to the food on set. He personally chose the meals that appeared in Jeff's apartment scenes. Every sandwich, every cup of coffee was selected to reveal character psychology. Stewart's cold meals symbolized his isolation, while Grace Kelly's perfectly plated dinners hinted at control and domestic fantasy. Hitchcock used props as storytelling weapons, not background dressing. His attention to minutiae became so precise that the script supervisor joked he was directing the silverware. The director replied, "Nothing is meaningless on camera. Even a slice of toast has purpose." That level of control turned an ordinary apartment into a psychological map of obsession and fear. The tension you feel watching Rear Window wasn't just written into the script, it was lived by the cast. Hitchcock kept the actors isolated from one another so Stewart could only view them through binoculars just like his character. There were no rehearsals together, only distant direction through speakers. It created an eerie authenticity. The more Stewart watched the neighbors, the more detached he became. By the final week, he told Hitchcock it felt like living in someone else's nightmare. Hitchcock smiled and said, "That's the point." The isolation technique transformed the studio into a living psychological experiment where observation became participation. One of the film's most iconic shots almost didn't happen. The camera push across the courtyard to Lars Thorwald's face was technically impossible with the equipment of the day. So Hitchcock's crew built a custom dolly rig on steel rails that stretched over the massive set. The camera glided silently through open windows without digital help or post-trickery. It was pure engineering. The result was a chilling moment of eye contact between watcher and watched. For audiences, it was suspense. For Hitchcock, it was confession. He once said that shot was his way of reminding everyone that the audience is never innocent either. Grace. Kelly's costumes weren't designed for glamour alone. Edith Head crafted them as psychological armor. Each outfit mirrored her emotional progression. The crisp white dress for the first scene symbolized control and distance. The dark green cocktail gown marked temptation, and the final casual blouse showed liberation. Hitchcock and Head planned it like a visual diary of transformation. Kelly's wardrobe changes became narrative cues for the audience. Not fashion, but storytelling through fabric. The result cemented her as both muse and mystery. It wasn't just a style icon being born, it was cinema turning couture into character. Hitchcock used real photographers to coach Stewart on camera technique. He learned how to handle the telephoto lens, develop film, and load the flashbulbs himself. Stewart's meticulous handling of the equipment wasn't acting, it was practice. Hitchcock wanted authenticity down to the muscle memory of pressing a shutter. Every snap of the flash in the final confrontation carried real physical tension. When the bulbs exploded in Thorwald's face, Stewart flinched for real from the heat and blinding glare. Those flashes weren't visual effects, they were real bursts of light timed with precision. The pain and panic you see in that moment were unfiltered and raw. Before we go deeper, go ahead and like and subscribe, because what happens next shows how far Hitchcock went to break filmmaking rules and build total control. Rear Window wasn't just filmed, it was engineered like a psychological trap. For Hitchcock, suspense came from the power of silence. He banned background music for most of the film, leaving audiences to feel the tension of distant noises, the dog barking, the record playing the faint argument. This was revolutionary for 1954 cinema, which relied heavily on orchestral cues. The result made every creak and whisper feel personal. Sound became paranoia. Viewers felt they were eavesdropping rather than watching. Hitchcock's minimalist soundscape inspired generations of filmmakers from Brian De Palma to David Fincher. It wasn't absence of score, it was presence of fear, and audiences didn't realize the soundtrack was their own heartbeat, accelerating in sync with the story. The set itself had weather patterns. Hitchcock wanted total realism, so technicians installed water pipes along rooftops to simulate rain and misters for humidity. He timed each atmospheric change to the story's emotional arc. When Jeff's suspicion peaked, the air became thick and wet like a fever. When the mood lifted, sunlight filled the stage. This level of control was unheard of in 1950s filmmaking. The crew called the system Hitchcock's private climate. They even nicknamed the thermostat the mood switch. It wasn't about realism, it was about manipulation. Hitchcock didn't direct just actors. He directed the air itself. That's why every frame of Rear Window feels alive, like the weather has emotions too. Watching it decades later, you can still feel the temperature of each scene shift with the tension of the story. The character of Lars Thorwald was partly inspired by real murder cases Hitchcock followed obsessively. He studied tabloid headlines about suburban disappearances and spousal crimes to construct the perfect everyman villain. Actor Raymond Burr modeled his movements after Hitchcock himself, complete with the same slumped posture and slow, deliberate gestures. The resemblance wasn't accidental. Hitchcock enjoyed inserting himself symbolically into his villains. Burr's Thorwald became Hitchcock's shadow on screen, the silent craftsman hiding behind ordinary appearances. The crew even joked that Hitchcock had made himself the killer. Years later, critics would argue that Thorwald represented Hitchcock's own dark fascination with control and observation. Watching through windows, filming through lenses, both acts of intrusion, both punishable by truth. Rear Window wasn't about murder alone, it was about the dangerous pleasure of looking. Filming the climactic struggle between Stewart and Burr was chaos. Hitchcock hated improvisation, but this scene became a dangerous exception. When Burr lunges into Jeff's apartment, Stewart was actually strapped to a concealed harness under his wheelchair to prevent falling off the platform. The blinding camera flashes used to fend off Thorwald were genuine magnesium bulbs that burned at over 4,000 degrees. They created real bursts of heat and light that left both actors momentarily disoriented. Stewart's flinches were not acting, they were survival instincts. One misfire scorched the lens housing and filled the set with smoke. Instead of cutting, Hitchcock yelled, "Keep rolling." The intensity of that take made it into the final film. It wasn't stagecraft, it was a battle of light and fear captured in real time. The film's moral ambiguity shocked censors. At the time, Hollywood's production code demanded clear distinctions between right and wrong. Rear Window blurred them deliberately. The hero spies the villain, but also violates privacy. The audience is complicit too, watching through the same lens. Censors tried to force Hitchcock to include moral justification for Jeff's actions, but he refused. He argued that curiosity was human nature and punishment was not always external. The result was groundbreaking. It questioned whether watching was an act of guilt or survival. Critics were divided, but audiences couldn't look away. Rear Window turned spectatorship into confession. It forced viewers to admit that beneath morality lies fascination, not purity, but obsession. That confrontation between conscience and curiosity became Hitchcock's signature and changed film theory forever. One of Hitchcock's greatest tricks was hiding his cameo in plain sight. Fans searched every window for him, but his appearance happens early as a man winding a clock in the songwriter's apartment. It lasts only seconds, yet it's symbolic. The master of suspense literally sets time in motion for everyone in his miniature world. It wasn't just vanity, it was philosophy. Hitchcock believed that once time begins, every choice in the story must follow like clockwork. That tiny gesture embodies his entire filmmaking logic. Precision, control, inevitability, nothing random, everything mechanical until it breaks. By placing himself as the keeper of time, he made Rear Window his most personal statement about fate. Even his smallest gesture holds a shadow of design and destiny. The soundscape of Rear Window was so complex it took longer to mix than to film. Every ambient noise was recorded live from multiple microphones placed across the set. The composer Franz Waxman provided only brief musical passages, leaving most of the film carried by natural rhythm. The hum of a refrigerator, the echo of footsteps, the ticking of a clock became Hitchcock's real instruments. This was a technical nightmare to synchronize in 1954, long before digital soundboards existed. The editing room turned into an acoustic laboratory. Engineers had to loop and re-record every effect by hand. The effort paid off. Rear Window's sound design became a prototype for modern sound, mixing inspiring thrillers like The Conversation and Blowout decades later. Silence and noise became tools of suspense and proof that fear could be heard, not just seen. The ending nearly destroyed the movie. Studio executives demanded a happier resolution where Jeff marries Lisa and the murderer confesses on camera. Hitchcock refused, calling it sentimental nonsense. He wanted ambiguity, not comfort. The battle lasted weeks until he finally screened a rough cut. When the executives saw audiences gasp at the final shot of Jeff asleep with both legs in casts, they surrendered. It was perfect irony, justice achieved but freedom lost. Hitchcock once said, "A story isn't complete when it ends happily, it ends when it leaves you thinking." That closing image became iconic precisely because it resisted Hollywood closure. It turned a voyeur's punishment into poetic justice, reminding viewers that curiosity always costs something. The director won the fight and changed the language of endings forever. James Stewart and Grace Kelly's chemistry was real but complicated. Stewart was deeply respectful, yet nervous, working opposite such intense allure. Hitchcock exploited this tension by keeping them slightly off balance emotionally. He would whisper conflicting directions to each before a take, telling Stewart to resist and Kelly to seduce. The result was natural friction captured on film. Their kiss scene became one of Hitchcock's most sensually charged moments. Yet after filming, Stewart admitted he was exhausted by her precision. Grace never missed a cue, never broke rhythm. Hitchcock watched like a scientist observing reactions. What audiences saw as romance was psychological chess orchestrated down to the heartbeat. It wasn't love, it was control disguised as affection. When Rear Window premiered, critics hailed it as entertainment, but philosophers saw something darker. Jean-Luc Godard called it a film that watches itself. Every window reflected a society's obsession with looking into other lives. Hitchcock had turned cinema into a mirror and dared audiences to question why they enjoyed watching others suffer. The film predicted modern surveillance culture long before cameras invaded everyday spaces. In every glowing window, we see our own reflection as spectators unable to look away. Rear Window wasn't just a thriller, it was prophecy disguised as entertainment. The apartment complex became a metaphor for screens before screens existed. Each glowing rectangle held a story. Each gaze held guilt. Bonus fact: Hitchcock's personal fear of blindness inspired the movie. He often spoke about nightmares where he could see danger but no one believed him. Rear Window was his therapy. He once said, "The greatest terror is not the knife, but the gaze that cannot move away." Behind the humor and elegance lay paranoia born from real fear of helplessness. By confining the camera to one room, Hitchcock exercised that dream. He forced the world to come to the watcher instead of letting the watcher escape. That's why Rear Window feels eternal, a nightmare loop about the power and punishment of seeing too much. Rear Window endures because it isn't just a story about a man in a wheelchair. It's about all of us staring at glowing windows, searching for truth in shadows. If you love this journey into hidden history, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which Hitchcock secret you want next. Because remember, in his world, everyone watches and everyone is watched.